Welcome to the second day of the 21st ABIS Annual Colloquium on business principles for the stakeholder capitalism era. And it's a pleasure to have you with us, and we are very happy to have you joining us in Brussels. And welcome, of course, warmly to our online attendees. For the online attendees, I would like to remind you of a few rules of conduct. So please keep your camera on so we can also see you, and I hope you can also see us in the audience as well from Brussels. Keep the mics muted unless you will be asked to speak. The meeting is being recorded, and we are going to take some screenshots and pictures. As you see, we have a photographer here. So if you do not wish to be featured in the photos, please let us know via email. Lastly, we will have an interactive session. So all of our participants here have a lovely name tag, and I will ask kindly the participants online to rename themselves so that we can allocate you correctly to your room. So we wanted really to make this event available both for the online audience and in-person participants, and we know that this can be challenging at times. And we have a slight surprise for you to increase the connections between the two audiences. And today we will be using Slido. So we will be using this for the Q&A and to make a test to see that everybody is able to use it smoothly. We would like to use it to know where our participants are joining us from. So of course we have participants here in the audience. But just share the country where you're from. So please go to slido.com or take a screenshot of the QR code and insert the hashtag #BizAtStake, which is a funny shortener of our title, but it's actually very meaningful hashtag because business are at stake. So this is why we organize this whole colloquium. So please answer to the poll. We should see, I think, a word tag, if I'm not mistaken, of all the countries that our participants are joining us from. United Kingdom, Netherlands, Poland, these are the countries that are winning. Okay, so it sounds like Netherlands. Oh, wow, this is a good representation. All right. Okay, I don't want to take too much time for more introduction. And I would actually like to give the floor to our opening speaker, Manuela, which I hope is joining us online. Is she there? Will be. Great. So Manuela from Manuela Brusoni. And Lisa Green-Campbell from George Mason University are members of our steering committee who helped us shaping the program of the colloquium. So I'm very happy to have Manuela give a few opening words to the second day of the colloquium. Thank you, Manuela.
I very appreciate the invitation of ABIS, Ivo, and Carolina. And then I would like to rebuild the idea of this colloquium, because the idea we had is to recommend a more substantial approach to the role of a mature understanding of business in society. And maybe the principle-based approach may be a preferred way to go beyond the overwhelming production of criteria, models, prescriptions, so on and so forth, which are, in my idea, in our idea, they are not helping, rather confusing the audience, whoever they are. And we, in a sense, we are assisting to a revamping of this theme. It is not really new, but now it's becoming more perceived by all the constituencies. And I would say that we need a mindful and reflective approach. The prescriptive one is not maybe the solution, and maybe it could be a misleading sometimes. So I would like to address three quick points. We are assisting to the proliferation of a number of new directive models, standards, which are being released by a number of institutions. Just to cite one of them, the new Corporate Social Responsibility Directive in November, and the European Sustainability Reporting Standard released by the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group. So all standards, all, I would say, the direction in order to report what something wider than the traditional, not financial reporting. And they are now including and be extended to a number of corporations, be they big, medium, and also small enterprises. So there is something bubbling up, which now we should, let's say, let go down a little bit. And again, the European Union plans to adopt a second set of ESG reporting standard by October 23. So that will specify an additional disclosure requirement. And let's add also, if you like, the World Economic Forum Manifesto, which states a set of principles and defines the purpose of a company, which is to engage all its stakeholders in a shared and sustained value creation. So there is a double approach. One is really ample, light, in a sense, too wide. And the other one is really prescriptive. So the idea is that we should all together find a different way to put, not in a priority or in a sequence, all these principles, whatever they are, but trying to define a common, say, pathway, a common journey. Because in my idea, in our idea, and I think we can share the board of directors approach and Lisa approach and mine, the idea is that could we think, if we look at our circular economy approach, could we think of a circular stakeholder approach? So let's try to keep, not in a priority or in a sequence, but in a flow, let's say, what a company could do and see if all these pieces of work can sustain each other. So let's start from the shareholder return. This is really important. This is not a minor issue. And then see what happens to people and suppliers. And let's see what happens to customers and fulfillment of market need, and see what happens to stakeholder value creation. And so let's start again. And this cycle can be mutual supporting, because we don't need to put separate pieces in a separate buckets. So when I was thinking of principles for corporate social responsibility, it came to my mind, going back to what I first learned when I was a child, that maybe we need a principle of principles. And I would like to suggest as a principle of principles to rephrase and to reinterpret the Archimedes principle, which in my idea put together also a sort of physics understanding of what could be a stakeholder approach. So in a sense, in my idea, any organization, private or public, totally or partially immersed in a fluid liquid society, and I echo Bauman's approach, is buoyed up by a force equal to the weight of the fluid displaced by itself. If you are deeply engaged in creating value for all the constituencies directly or indirectly, Archimedes' principle could work as a first approach to our principle-based stakeholder value creation. The net force which sustains and accompanies value, impact, and future well-being creation driven by the organization is the difference between the magnitude of the buoyant force and its weight. If this net force is positive, the organization rises, sails toward a better future. If negative, the organization sinks and all its shareholders with it. So together we are losing a piece of value altogether if we don't think about the principle of principles and see if this broad concept can help us to, let's say, make something sustain the principal approach we are trying to define all together during this colloquium. So, bye from Archimedes, Syracuse, Sicily, Italy.
Thank you very much, Manuela. We have so many wonderful metaphors coming in during these 2 days. We also had the image yesterday of the company actually not being at the center of an ecosystem with all the stakeholders around, but actually being part of the system and together of equal importance of all the stakeholders that it needs to actually operate and survive. Thank you so much, Manuela. And now from one powerful woman to another, I'm pleased to introduce you our next keynote speaker, Pauline Bieringa, Managing Director of Triodos Bank. And we are very pleased to have her here live in Brussels. And we're really looking for an example of a company that has a truly integrated approach and for whom stakeholder value creation is actually at their core. And we are very happy that a representative of Triodos Bank is with us today. So without further ado, please welcome Pauline.
Yeah, very honored to be here. And thank you, Ivo, for that. Ivo and I have known each other for a very long time. Ivo once interviewed me, I think 10, 12 years ago. And I still use that interview because he asked me some very good questions, which I still remember. But yeah, very honored to be here and also humbled because, well, I attended the colloquium yesterday. And I was really impressed with all the lectures, and there will be another very impressive lecture after me. So I'm sort of in between. I'll try to tell you a little bit about what Triodos is doing. But first of all, I would like to share some takeaways from yesterday, which I thought I couldn't not include today. So. The most important takeaway was that it was a very positive attitude, I thought, and very positive atmosphere, despite the market, economic and political circumstances. I learned a lot about the difference between shareholder capitalism and stakeholder capitalism. I found it very interesting, and I think Crispin mentioned it, that the business conduct is changing also in business schools. I remember when I attended the Rotterdam School of Management almost 30 years ago, everybody focused on making money, and that's now fortunately different. Carolina already mentioned the community instead of the firm at the center, which was an interesting comment made. Another thing I heard was weighted governance. And Lisa mentioned the role of the humanities, and I was very happy with that because I'm an accidental banker. I studied history and art history, ended up in banking because banking is people business. But Lisa emphasized the role that the humanities can play in the paradigm shift that we're in at the moment. So thought leadership, creativity, not only numbers based, and what is the purpose of what we're doing. Another thing which I recognize also from working with Triodos is there's future for profit and doing good at the same time. It can go together, making money for good. And for instance, the B Corp corporations are a very good example of that. Another positive development is there is a movement from in behavioral change, and education is, of course, a key success factor in that. So very happy that that all the business schools are also integrating sustainability in their programs. We just talked about that. Not all the business schools are doing it right now, but at least there is well, positive change. Net zero is not enough. It's good to try to achieve net zero, but we should go much further into transformation and regeneration. And last but not least, sustainability is more than just the environment. It's also about social impact, and we need a holistic approach. Well, just very briefly about myself, my link with Triodos. I've been working with Triodos for the past 2 years, but I have had a link with Triodos for about 30 years. When I was working for a big commercial bank, I got an education or a training in financing wind energy from Triodos 30 years ago. And I was on the supervisory board of one of their microfinance funds for a long time. So I already stood with one leg in the organization, and fortunately, since 2 years, completely. I worked for ING, where risk and return were the most important factors. Then at BNG, which is a public sector bank in the Netherlands, focusing on societal impact. And Triodos Bank does all. So it's all about the triangle of impact, risk, and return. I would now like to show the short video about Triodos.
So while we play the video, I would like to remind you that if you would like to ask some questions, we'll be using Slido. So feel free to type them in. If you see some questions that are interesting to you, please like them up, and we will read the questions that receive most interest from both all the audiences online and offline.
Imagine two banks, both employ helpful people who deal with your questions, and both are financially sound. At each bank, you can save regularly, earn interest, and of course manage your account online. Only one bank does it differently. This bank only invests in things which are good for both people and the planet. Things like renewable energy, organic farming, and ecological development. This bank invests in businesses that want to make a healthy profit and want to make a positive difference to society. This bank finances those businesses only with money from their depositors and investors. So the money those people save is invested back into the society they live in. It's actually very simple. Both savers and investors help to build a better, more sustainable world. That one bank is us. Follow your heart, use your head. Triodos Bank.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Well, you probably all know Mariana Mazzucato, one of my favorite economists, and her latest book is about moonshot thinking. And I think the founders of Triodos Bank had this moonshot thinking about 42 years ago, when they decided to found Triodos Bank, and it's all about a different way of thinking about money and its uses. It's not about money as a means to an end, but it's money as a means to do good. Triodos has a very clear vision and mission. So make money work for positive social, economic, and cultural change with a holistic approach. I referred to it just before. That also one of the speakers yesterday mentioned that it's not only about environment, it's also about social impact. And the reason why Triodos started with renewable energy, so that's green, was Chernobyl. So in 1986, the bank decided to start financing renewable energy. At the time, revolutionary, so really moonshot thinking. And so, as the video also said, we focus on environment and climate, but also on the social impact and agriculture and food. And one of the things I really like, also because of my background, is that we focus a lot on arts, so culture, because we see that as a very important aspect in public and social life. So Triodos was founded to change and finance a better world. During the financial crisis in 2008, we got a lot of new clients who were fed up with the big banks, and so then we also started providing more services. What we also did was we said, we are too small to do it by ourselves. So we don't only have to finance change, but we also want to change finance. And so we were one of the founders of the Sustainable Finance Lab, which was founded 12 years ago, and which now has all major banks in the Netherlands as members. So we have to do it together. Otherwise, we cannot achieve what we want to achieve. So we're really a normal bank in terms of products and services. The only thing we don't do is provide consumer credit because, according to our idea, that only stimulates consumer spending, which doesn't fit within our mission. We co-founded the Sustainable Finance Lab. We were also one of the founders of the Global Alliance of Banking on Values. And at the moment, we have about 100 members worldwide. So we're already in a community changing the world for good. The products and services that we do are not groundbreaking, certainly not. But we try to be a front runner, so we have a certain way of positive activism in our DNA. So only sustainable products and services, and we also want to show that sustainability can go together with making profit. And in the 40 years we haven't had any losses yet. So we were just thinking about it. That also shows that doing good can be also a very safe way of banking. I mentioned we have a front runner role in terms of our mission, very focused on doing good, also in terms of the products and services. We don't do it alone and only with other banks, but also with other institutions. We cooperate, for instance, with the European Union and the European Investment Fund. We have a very interesting guarantee for the arts and culture as the only bank at the moment. And we have a very ambitious goal, which is as 1 to 0. We want to be CO2 neutral by 2035, so much sooner than other banks. Which means that our complete portfolio will have to be CO2 neutral, including our clients. And if we don't reach that goal, we need to compensate the rest. So terms like sustainability and social inclusion, I don't think we used them when we founded the bank in 1980. But both have been our focus from the start, and also always jointly. So in this holistic approach. Another thing that was mentioned yesterday, and that I also really appreciate, is the fact that the creation of community is very important. Well, I always say, Triodos is a bank. But actually, we are a community with a banking license, which gives them a much better idea on what we try to achieve. And it's funny, when I talk to Triodos clients, they always say, I'm a member of your community. They will never say, I bank with you, which also already indicates that it's a different bank. What is very important, and that's also something that was mentioned yesterday, is show what you're doing. I think Crispin mentioned it yesterday. It's not just greenwashing. What matters is not just the money, but show the materiality, what we're doing and also what we're not doing. And that's also something that we do. So we're very transparent. For instance, on my app, on my Triodos app, I can see which customers are living around me in where I live in The Hague, also the business clients. So I know which butcher to go to. I still can go to a butcher, although a lot of colleagues don't anymore, but I do. But the bookstore, and so it also helps to create this community. Well, last but not least, what distinguishes us, and that's also, of course, one of the themes, or maybe the main theme today, is our capital structure. We don't have sort of the traditional system of shareholders. We have certificate holders, and certificate holders have no, they have rights, but they have delegated them to an administration office, which is called SAD, which protects the bank from being taken over. And all the buying and selling of those certificates goes through this SAD. Well, the value of the certificates is determined internally, so we're not dependent on market circumstances. We have had the system for about 40 years now, and during COVID, also, under the influence of COVID, we noticed that we need to take a look at this system again, because we're too dependent on the certificates. So what we're doing at the moment, two things. One, we already expanded our capital structure. We issued a green bond last year, which was taken up by a number of big investors. And we're at the moment constructing a multilateral trading facility, which will facilitate the trading of the certificates in order to expand our capital structure. And that's, of course, good for what we want to do, and that's do for the good. Finance as many sustainable projects as possible. How am I with time? Can I still have 3 minutes? Yeah. Okay. Good. Because I would like to end with some challenges. Being a value-based bank is I really enjoy it. There's a lot of people, well, most people that work with us are very much focused on our mission, and but it sometimes also can lead to big discussions, big dilemmas. For instance, are we financing dark green projects, or are we, or do we prefer to finance the transition to dark projects? And I'm of the last opinion. Because I think it's that's where our front runner role can play a role, much more than just financing green, because basically that has become a safe area and can be financed by everybody. I already mentioned that we try to change finance, so we're happy that other banks also move into our direction. But of course, it also leads to more competition. So we really have to stay ahead of the competition by all the time trying to look for new areas. And one area, for instance, is mortgages, bio-based mortgages, which is really very interesting and still unique at the moment. We even got on the Time magazine with our bio-based mortgage, so very proud of that. What other companies also face is the retention of co-workers. People are very happy to start working with us, but other banks are very keen on getting the people that work with us, because they have a lot of experience in sustainability. Talking about working with Triodos, I found it very funny when I applied for the job 2.5 years ago. I learned all the financials by heart, and as you see, I haven't mentioned any financials, but that's typically Triodos. But well, anyway, I did that. But what I got is write down your comments on our mission, write down your comments on our business principle instead of questioned about the financials. For us, whether a person fits with the organization is much more important than whether he or she has the experience yet, because we can teach banking. Banking is not a very difficult task. I mean, and I can, well, no, I'm not going to say anything about it. So how do we tackle those challenges? Well, I think it's good to show the results, and I think that's where we are too modest as a value-based bank. And I noticed that with other value-based banks, we should really show what we're doing and what we're not doing. Exactly what Crispin said yesterday. So work together with like-minded companies. We also have a close connection with academia. In the Netherlands and also outside of the Netherlands, for instance, with the Agricultural University and the University of Groningen, my alma mater, and with Delft, the Technical University on the renewable energy. So we have to pay a lot of attention to retention of co-workers, as we call them. We don't say employees, but co-workers. And also retain this community feeling that we have with our clients, because, well, as I said before, the sector and sustainability is becoming much more popular with other banks as well. Well, and finally, when our CEO, Peter Blom, left 2 years ago, after 40 years of Triodos, he was one of the founders, and he has been our CEO for 25 years. He left us with a very nice message, I think. He said, you know, it's just 3 C's: show courage, show creativity, and show compassion. So, thank you. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much. So let's see what we have on our Slido. What questions we have from the audience. I think I've seen a couple already. So you mentioned a lot of examples of the work that you're doing with the art sector and then the renewable energy. And there was one question about another practical example of a project that you have been financing.
Oh, where to start? I have so many, but what I really like, and I think we should pay more attention to, is social inclusion. And as I said, you know, it has been a part of our mission from the start. But people usually, so if they know Triodos, they associate Triodos with renewable energy. But social inclusion is equally important. So, for instance, we finance smaller healthcare projects, and a very nice example is housing for ex-prisoners. So these are the social inclusion projects that I really like, yeah, and that are also difficult to get financing for.
And so there was also another question related to housing and individuals. So I'll ask that. So yeah, there was a question about mortgages, and is this something that is a service that you actually offer, or?
Yeah, very interesting question. I mean, the question I get more often, mortgage lending is also consumer lending. So why do you do it? But we see housing as an important aspect of this holistic approach. So that's why we decided to provide a mortgage lending in order to to give everybody the chance to have decent housing, and we focus on mortgages for sustainable housing and bio-based.
All right. So somebody is asking about bio-based mortgages. Oh, disappeared.
So bio-based is with natural materials.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I actually really like also the last question that we have. And it also relates to a question that we had yesterday in the chat from one of the participants joining online, which was, the urgency that we have for business to transform, but also the need to finance the transition. And there is this question about, impact investing and transition financing. So, yeah, would you have anything to share about that?
Yeah, well, again, a very good question, because we, as a bank, we finance, we do senior debt, so that's not equity, but within Triodos we also have investment funds which can help us, and for sort of the total financing, I think it's very important to work together with other institutions. So that's, for instance, why we work with the European Investment Fund, which can provide guarantees, but also with other funds that provide equity. And I think that's something that, that we can do much more than before. I think it's also a luxury because until recently, there weren't many competitors for us. So competition is increasing. So as I said, we really have to stay thinking how we can retain this front runner role.
So yes, competition, collaboration can also be two keywords of next era that hopefully we are moving into. So stakeholder capitalism. And thank you so much, Pauline, for bringing the example of Triodos Bank. And can you join me in a round of applause?
Thank you. Thank you. If there's more questions, then you find me on LinkedIn.
Yes, and in person there is going to be a break, so feel free to take advantage of that as well. And now, so in the spirit of the business academic collaboration that is the heart of ABIS activities, we of course have an academic keynote and a very special one. The whole colloquium is about business principles for the stakeholder capitalism era, and we are pleased to have with us the originator of the stakeholder theory, which have been gaining a lot of prominence. Of course, it's not a new concept because it was formulated in 1984, but luckily now it's really gaining more prominence in business practice as well. So we are pleased to have with us Professor Ed Freeman, Professor and Academic Director of the Institute for Business and Society at the University of Virginia Darden School of Business. And he will be speaking about the power of end. So how to go beyond trade-off and what lies beyond that. So thank you so much, Ed, for joining us, and the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I wish I was there live, but in today's age, this is about as good as we get. I'm in my grown daughter's old bedroom. You can see behind me that Yoda is looking over my shoulder, and I sort of like that because it reminds me of how much wisdom I don't have. Rather than anything else. I get a lot of credit for stuff I probably don't deserve. I wrote a paper in, actually it was 1977, before I wrote that old book, about what would happen if we took the stakeholder idea seriously. And essentially no one cared. And they didn't care for a long time. And so it is nice that people seem to care now. I really have kind of good news to talk about, and we sort of need good news in today's world. The good news is that the story of business is really changing. The narrative about what business is and what it can do is really changing. You know the old story. The old story is, business is about the money. It's about making as much money as you can, primarily for shareholders, or primarily for owners, even though in the U.S. shareholders are actually not owners. But it's about business works best, according to this old story, when it's in free, unregulated markets, whatever those things are. And according to the old story, the people in business are, mostly care about their own economic self-interest, their short-term economic self-interest. And when I tell people I teach business ethics, they kind of manage not to laugh. They say things like, I didn't know business had any, or must be a short course, or I remember being in a bar actually in Copenhagen, where you'd think there was more a better view. And I told someone I teach business ethics, and they said, oh, that's a theoretical subject, isn't it? And so that's pretty much the old story. And what we've seen is that we've seen that there's been a kind of perfect storm. And the perfect storm played out over a number of years. I like to take it back to the global financial crisis, 2008 or so. And the vestigial limbs of that, which we still see today. The increasing awareness of things like inequality around the world and poverty, the increased awareness about continued racism around the world and gender discrimination. And then we have, of course, the specter of global warming in front of us. I don't like to call it climate change, because climate change, I think words matter. Climate change is the weather. Global warming is we're all going to burn up in hell. And I think that's a more accurate view of what's going on. We've seen the reemergence of wars and terrorism, etc. We've seen a fracturing of the state around the world. And now, as these things are building and increasing, throw a pandemic on top of that. And I don't know anyone who's argued, well, I do know a couple of people, but I don't know anyone seriously arguing the way out of these issues, the way to a future that's worth building for our children, is to knuckle down and really pay attention to shareholder value. I just don't, I mean, that's just, it's not going to work. I mean, it's pretty obvious that it's not going to work. And so the idea of what a business is changing. And there are lots of calls for reform that we've seen over the last 10 years or so. People much more interested in things like sustainability, like corporate social responsibility, which is these are old ideas, but much more interest in those things now. It's under the rubric of ESG, environment, society, and governance. But there's a tremendous amount of interest in those things. More interest in things like corporate philanthropy. We've seen the emergence of groups like Just Capital, which, if you haven't gone to the Just, JUST Capital website, I would urge you to do that, because they're holding companies' feet to the fire. Those companies that have said they care about other stakeholders, and it's really a remarkable thing. There's inclusive capitalism, there's people talking about green business, there's conscious capitalism, there's Richard Branson's version of that. There are companies trying to understand the Sustainable Development Goals and how they measure performance based on those. There's the GRI, even Wall Street and the city have gotten into the act. There's impact investing and socially responsible investing, and all kinds of proposals for reform, and that's pretty much a good thing. For me, I was before the pandemic in the final days of the Obama administration. I was asked to a meeting at the White House by Department of Labor. Tom Perez was the labor secretary. And there were about 40 or 50 of us. And these were the people that had proposed these reforms. People worried about impact investing and ESG and conscious capitalism. And the idea was, what can government do to kind of speed up the reforms? What's the right brand of this stuff? Now, pretty much everybody thought their version was the right brand. Okay, so, and of course I thought my version was the right brand. But as I sat there, I thought, this is not the best question to ask. It's not a question of what's the right brand. It's a question of what are the 4 or 5 things that we really got to deal with. So my colleagues, Bobby Parmar and Kirsten Martin and I wrote a book called The Power of And, Responsible Business Without Trade-offs. And I want to get to that, but I guess what I've come around to the view, and I might write yet one more book about this, is taking all these reforms and saying, really what's going on here is a move from investor capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. And lots of people have written about this. In the U.S. today, there's so many people that have written about it that it's managed to gain critics from both the left and the right, and I appreciate that, because for 40 years I've pretty much pissed off people on the left and the right. People on the left can't possibly think about businesses doing something good. And I actually love businesses, because I think businesses lifted us out of poverty. It's made the fact that we can have this conversation possible, and all kinds of other things. And the potential for it is unbelievable. And I've, of course, pissed off people on the right who think I'm a communist. At least in the U.S. they do. And in the U.S. that's a bad thing, by the way. Some of you may think that's a good thing, but U.S. is not a good thing. So, and I don't have a bunch of people in the center who think, yeah, you're kind of right down the middle, because in U.S. politics now, being in the center means taking the worst ideas of both the left and the right. And so I don't have a politics of this. I just think it's about what it takes to run a great business. And there are 3 or 4 different ideas about stakeholder capitalism. If you think of stakeholder capitalism as this kind of broad movement of changing the narrative of business, there are 3 or 4 ways to understand that. First way, people on the left and right have argued this about virtue signaling. Now, again, I'm a philosopher, so I'm not sure I know what virtue signaling is. One way to signal that you're virtuous is to be virtuous. So virtue signaling is supposed to be bad, but I don't really see that. But that's definitely kind of one view that quickly leads to people thinking about greenwashing and those kinds of things. Okay. I don't know why that. Okay. And the second view is people who have said, well, this stakeholder capitalism is just CSR. It's just the same thing. I mean, some companies might mean it, but it's really same idea, old idea, new clothes. There's a third version that exists primarily in Davos, I think, and other places, that stakeholder capitalism is about kind of top-down elites. And it's about, CEOs and government ministers trying to figure out how best to organize society. I'm pretty skeptical of that as well. And so the view I would hold is that stakeholder capitalism is fundamentally about the business model. It's about what makes a business successful. And it's the idea that any business, and I've said this for a long time, some of you I know have heard me say this many times, so I'm gonna say it one more time. To be successful, a business has to create value for customers, suppliers, employees, communities, and the people with the money. And as we thought about this, as we thought about the sort of move to stakeholder capitalism, we decided, we thought, well, it's not that you got to throw out the old idea about business. What you have to do is complete it to make it relevant. And so we wrote this book, and we decided that it wasn't the stuff you read in the papers. It's like purpose or profits. It was purpose and profits. The idea that profits are bad is a stupid idea. It's like saying, I gotta have red blood cells to live, but making red blood cells is not the purpose of life. Businesses must have profits to live. At some point, they got to have profits at roughly the weighted average cost of capital, the WACC. But it doesn't follow that the purpose of a business is to make as much money as possible. Purpose matters, and profits matter too. So it's purpose and profits. And we tried to look at the 4 or 5 things that, whatever the new narrative turns out to be, it's got to deal with these 4 or 5 things. And the first one is purpose and profits. I mean, look, entrepreneurs don't start companies to make as much money as possible. I'm sure there are a few that do, but none that I know do. I always tell students who say, look, we're going to start this business. We're going to grow it to a unicorn. We're going to flip it. And, we're going to retire with $1 billion. I tell them, you better get a job, because it's a hell of a lot easier to make money if you get a job than it is to start a business. That's really hard. Entrepreneurs start businesses because they're on fire about an idea. It can be an idea about, better corks in wine, or it can be an idea about figuring out how the computer revolution can change our lives, like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. But they're on fire about an idea, and that's what makes them. It's the passion and purpose that makes them in part successful. In addition to, of course, they've got to make money, or they can't exist. So it's purpose and profits. Second idea, no surprise to anyone here who's heard me before, it's about stakeholders and financiers or shareholders. You got to have both. Every business has always, throughout time and into the future, every business has always created value, or sometimes destroyed it, for customers, suppliers, employees, communities, people with the money. It's just what businesses do. And if you realize that you're doing that, you can do it better. And that's the real power of this kind of new mindset, this new narrative, because it acknowledges that these stakeholders kind of go together. And that's the real secret here. I spent a lot of years kind of foolishly trying to figure out trade-offs. So some of my colleagues and some who are here today will attest to this, of people hammering me for not telling them which stakeholder is most important. Well, the problem with that is that stakeholder interests go together. The insight of stakeholder theory was thought to be, well, there's more than shareholders. That's true, but the main insight of stakeholder theory is that these interests are connected. That how you deal with customers affects how you deal with employees and community and suppliers, and how you deal with communities affects how you deal with customers and how you deal with shareholders, etc. That there's an interconnection, there's an interdependence among stakeholders, and that's the main insight here. That's what makes stakeholder theory easy to say and hard to do, because you have to actually think through what the interdependence is. You have to think through as a manager how you harmonize the interest of stakeholders. And I like the metaphor from music, to harmonize their interest, because in harmony the notes are different, the stakeholder interests are different, but they sound good together, and you have to figure out how to make them sound good together. So it's about stakeholders and shareholders. The third idea is it's about seeing business, yes, as a market institution and understanding market forces, but you also have to understand social forces. And it's both of those things. To think that business can be seen as just a market institution is, again, I think, a silly idea in today's world. Certainly today we know that issues like discrimination and racism affect pretty much not every business, but a lot of them. And global warming, the same. Executives don't know how to do this very much, because we don't teach them how to think about social or societal issues in business schools. But we need to get better at that. We need to teach them that, look, you don't have to do everything, but you do have to think about the societal issues that affect you, that affect your purpose, or else you're not going to be as effective as you could be. So purpose and profit, stakeholders and shareholders, seeing business as a societal institution as well as a market institution. The fourth one I shouldn't have to say, but I do, which is seeing human beings as not just economic, short-term economic maximizers. There are people like that. We generally call them sociopaths. And, we have grand theories about that. In the US, at least, we generally elect them to high office. And that's a nonpartisan statement for me. But we need to understand that people are capable of bad stuff, but they're capable of great acts of kindness and love. Anybody who's ever been in love, anybody who's had a child knows that we're not just economic short-term maximizers. And we need to have a narrative about business that understands our complex humanity. And for the most part, I think people are beginning to get the message for that after the pandemic. And finally, we need to put business and ethics together. The idea that business ethics is a joke is, of course, a problem, because again, business has played an incredibly positive role, and a negative one as well, in the emergence of our culture, of our society, and we have to see those things as going together. So I think I'm probably out of time. Let me stop there and say, you know, if you take these 5 things seriously, then whatever the brand turns out to be, I think these are the 5 things that we need to deal with. And stakeholder capitalism is, in fact, best understood as understanding, as seeing how the business model has to change. There's another whole story about what this means for business schools, in addition to what it means for businesses. I'm pretty optimistic. I don't think there's any going back to the old story. This is happening all around the world, and I think that's great. So let me stop there and see if there are questions or comments or loud exclamations of "that's really kind of stupid."
Thank you so much, Ed. Let me walk carefully here because there's plenty of cables. There are questions. Yes, they are. We are using Slido for that, and thank you so much for inserting your own questions. I had a chance to take a sneak peek already, and there are quite a few about the nature of capitalism. So maybe I will put them together. So I think you already answered a few of them, and you really pointed out that stakeholder capitalism should be or is about business models. But I think the audience would like to have some clarification about your view of stakeholder capitalism itself. Some questions are asking, doesn't capitalism have an inner rationale based on economic value and the commoditization of everything, nature, human labor, etc.? There was another question now on capitalism, which I forgot, but maybe you could give, yes, there was one about economic growth. So I think these two could be interconnected. So could you share your views on that?
Sure. I mean, look, the so-called father of capitalism was Adam Smith. Adam Smith never used the word capitalism. We get capitalism from Marx, and so, you know, that's a little bit like I don't know, the game is on Saturday, letting the U.S. decide what the uniforms of the Netherlands team is going to look like. You know, it's not great. I mean, that wouldn't be a great thing, I think. So I don't. There's the story. The old story is, yes, this commodifies everything. It's all about economics, etc. I don't think that's true. I mean, business is about human beings. We're not just economic beings. We're not just economic beings in business. So you know, that's one of the things that has to change. We give, especially in business schools, we give economists and finance and accounting folks far too much power, and we don't pay enough attention to people from the humanities. It was interesting way back in 81 or so, when the Wharton School was founded. It was founded from Joseph Wharton, who gave the original grant, to be a place where people of commerce would come and sort of get finished, in the sense of you had humanities people and business people there together in the beginning. Of course, it was a failure because the humanities people didn't care about business, and the business people didn't really care about the humanities people. I think the next faculty, and they had to start over. I think the next faculty member with a degree in the humanities after 1881 may have been me in 1981 with the PhD in philosophy. So I think we need a kind of this is why the narrative has to change, a radically different idea about what business is. And if we see it that way, it's amazing. Look, if you see business and you teach students that business is about exploiting and commodifying everything, etc., that's what students are going to expect. If you teach that business is an incredibly powerful societal institution that can do good and sometimes bad, that's a really different idea. And so I'll just stop at that. If you don't like capitalism, and it has got a lot of baggage, and people are trying to give stakeholder capitalism baggage. I just found out that BlackRock was going to start the Institute for Stakeholder Capitalism. They've changed the name to the Institute for Long-Term Capitalism because of the politics of ESG and people seeing stakeholder capitalism as being, quote, woke. I don't think it has anything to do with that, really.
Thank you so much. We actually have a few more questions that came in, even though time is up, but I think the audience will appreciate your answers to that. I found one particularly interesting, which is about nature, which sometimes is called the voiceless stakeholder. So one question would be, nature would be considered a stakeholder in your theory?
Yeah.
And just to build on your point about the long-term vision, so these 5 principles that you shared with us seem to indicate that there is a need for this long-term view. So how do we make sure that this long-term view is created when there is always short-term pressure in the market to deliver on results? And yeah, what maybe might be the role of business schools and academics in this?
Okay, great. First, on the environment, a lot of people have argued that we need to see the environment as a stakeholder. There's an idea about theory that says you got to determine who's a stakeholder for all cases, for all ideas, for all situations. And until you do that, you don't have a real theory. I'm what philosophers would call a pragmatist. And one of the things that most pragmatists believe is that you can't make definitions do too much work. Who's a stakeholder depends in part on what problem you're trying to solve. If I'm trying to solve the if I'm trying to solve the problem of what's my purpose, I probably want to restrict who's a stakeholder: customers, suppliers, employees, communities, people, money. If I'm trying to solve a problem of what happens if the EU passes this particular restrictive rule, I probably got to be a lot more fine-grained about that. Who's a stakeholder? Well, it depends on what problem you're trying to solve. I've always thought that the other issue with stakeholders was, and the way I originally thought of it was, stakeholders have some ability to act. They're agents. And the problem with seeing the environment as a stakeholder is it doesn't really have an ability to deliberate and act. And so I've always said, well, it's not a stakeholder, but it's, of course, incredibly important. And it's important. It's so important that customers, suppliers, employees, communities, people with money, managers need to think about it, but they need to act. And so I've always thought that it didn't make a lot of sense to see the environment as a stakeholder. I've come around to the view that if the problem is you're trying to get people to pay attention to the environment, and one way they'll pay attention is if you call it a stakeholder, I'm fine with that. That's really no problem, because I don't think there's a this is always a stakeholder in every situation. It's a very interesting question. It's a question. Trying to do that is just one more vestigial limb of the positivism that absolutely infects business theory, and I mean infect. Infection is not a good thing. And the last question, gee, why am I blanking on the last one, John?
It was about, yeah, how to promote maybe more long-term.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Yeah, and so, as I've gotten older, I've become increasingly skeptical of the short-term, long-term distinction. People say, I think it's just a matter of being older, what do you want to be in 10 years? And my answer is alive. Long-term is probably Tuesday, I think I've heard for my entire career, at this stakeholder stuff and this ethics stuff, it makes sense in the long term, but in the short term, we got lots of other pressures. So look, as the short term gets closer to the long term, when does it start to make sense? Well, it doesn't, because the long term moves. We live life in the short term. So I have become an incredible promoter of the short term. What we have to do is do the right things in the short term. And so oftentimes what happens is, in the long term, it'll work out. In the long term, we're all dead, as Keynes said. And we got to figure out how to harmonize stakeholder interest in the short term that'll last. So I think short term, long term, as a distinction, as a dichotomy, is a lazy way of saying this doesn't work. It's just a way of pretending to say this about long-term capitalism, is to say, wait a minute, I don't know how to make this work in the short term, in the now, because we live life in the short term, and we got to figure out how to harmonize stakeholder interest and live according to purpose today, not something that's going to happen in the long term. Here's how you have a great long term: have a great short term, keep it up. That's the trick. It's hard. It's easy to say. It's hard to do. This is hard to do. The saying it is the easy part. I'm amazed at people that have built companies like Whole Foods and the Container Store and Danone and others around the world that have taken the stakeholder ideas seriously, and they've tried to figure out how to make these interests go in the same direction. That's hard to do.
Thank you so much for leaving us with this challenge that we will keep reflecting upon. And thank you so much for joining us during the ABIS Colloquium. Really appreciate your engagement. And yes, please join me in a round of applause for Ed.
Thank you.
I hope the audio is strong enough for you to hear it, Ed, from here. Thank you so much. We will now be moving into a break, which is going to be a little shorter. So we'll have around 10 minutes, and we have some snacks for the online audience, for the offline audience, not the online audience. Maybe we will find a way to do that in the future. But let me not overpromise. So we start again in around 10 minutes at 4 p.m. Brussels time. Thank you so much for joining us.